If I buy all these sweets, will you marry me? Dennis Walker said it lightly, like it was nothing more than a clever joke. The street didn't just quiet, it paused. Janet Green looked up from the glass jars lining her candy stand, blinked once, then slowly smiled. Not the smile of someone flattered, the smile of someone amused. "That's your opening line?" she asked calmly, brushing sugar from her fingers onto her red apron. Wow. Billionaires really do think money replaces personality. A ripple of laughter rolled through the crowd. Phones lifted. Someone whistled. A woman near the curb clapped once, sharp and delighted. And Dennis Walker, CEO, dealmaker, man who commanded boardrooms without raising his voice, felt something unfamiliar crack open in his chest. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. Before we go any further, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, turn on your notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. It helps us keep bringing you powerful, unforgettable stories like this one. Dennis Walker wasn't supposed to be standing there. He had a board meeting in less than an hour, 3 unread messages from his assistant, and a company whose quarterly decisions could move markets. Walker Industries didn't pause because its CEO felt restless. It didn't care if he needed air or silence or a break from the constant pressure of being right. And yet, there he was. He'd left his car 2 blocks away and chosen to walk, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight beneath a tailored jacket. The downtown street buzzed with life, tourists weaving past locals, street musicians tuning guitars, laughter spilling out of cafes. Everything moved fast, loud, careless. Dennis usually lived above this noise. But that afternoon, something had pulled him down into it. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was boredom. Or maybe it was the quiet rebellion of a man who spent his life in control and, just once, wanted to feel surprised. That was when he saw the stand. It was small and bright, squeezed between a coffee shop and a souvenir store. A striped awning, shaded rows of cupcakes dusted with sugar, thick brownies stacked neatly, and glass jars filled with candies that caught the sunlight like tiny jewels. The whole thing felt strangely out of place among steel buildings and rushing feet. And behind it stood Janet Green. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. Her yellow shirt was simple, her red apron smudged with chocolate and flour. Brown hair escaped a loose ponytail at the nape of her neck. No heavy makeup, no practiced smile. She worked with the focus of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and didn't need approval for it. Dennis slowed without realizing it. He stopped in front of the stand and waited. Janet didn't look up. "Just a minute," she said, adjusting a handwritten price tag. Dennis smiled faintly. He was used to being noticed immediately. Used to rooms shifting when he entered, conversations lowering, people straightening their posture without knowing why. Here, he was just another man standing too close to the counter. A few seconds passed, then more. He cleared his throat. "Excuse me." "A minute is 60 seconds, she replied without lifting her head. "You still have 23 left." Someone nearby snorted. Heat crept up Dennis's neck. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes were sharp, curious, and entirely unimpressed. "What can I get you?" she asked, professional and calm. Dennis glanced at the sweets, then back at her, his mind normally so quick in negotiations stalling completely. "Did you make all of these?" he asked, buying time. "Every single one," she said. "I wake up at 4 in the morning for it." 4? He frowned. "That's brutal." "That's dedication," she corrected. "Some people don't know the difference." Another quiet laugh drifted from the crowd. Dennis chuckled despite himself. "How much for everything?" he asked suddenly, spreading his hand toward the stand. Janet blinked. "Everything?" "All of it." She studied him for a moment, as if deciding whether he was serious or just another man with too much confidence and not enough sense. She named a price. Dennis reached for his wallet without hesitation. The amount barely registered. And then, without thinking, without planning, the joke slipped out. The line he'd used before. The line that had always worked. "If I buy all these sweets," he said, leaning closer, lowering his voice. Will you marry me? For 2 seconds, the world stopped. Footsteps slowed. Music from a nearby shop faded into the background. A couple passing by turned to look. Then Janet laughed. Not shy, not flattered, but loud and genuine. Oh, wow, she said, wiping the corner of her eye. Do men really still think money is a personality? The crowd reacted instantly. Someone laughed out loud. A teenager raised his phone higher. A woman near the curb shook her head, smiling. Dennis felt his confidence freeze in place. I didn't mean, he started. You did, Janet interrupted gently. And that's fine. A lot of people try to impress. You just picked the wrong person, in the wrong place, with the wrong strategy. She stepped back, already reaching for a paper bag. If you actually want to buy something, she continued, the caramel brownie is the most popular. If you just want to stand there recovering your dignity, that's fine too. But I have a line. Dennis turned. An older man stood behind him, wallet in hand, eyes amused. She's right, son, the man said. You need to work on your pitch. Laughter followed. Dennis stepped aside, unsure what to do with his hands, his words, or the strange sensation tightening his chest. He slid his wallet back into his pocket, opened his mouth to say something else, then thought better of it and turned to leave. Hey. He stopped. Janet tossed a brownie toward him, wrapped neatly in parchment. On the house, she said, to make up for the public humiliation. He caught it by reflex. Thanks, he said, unsure if that was the right response. Next time, she added, try hello. It's underrated. Dennis nodded slowly and walked away, the brownie warm in his hand. It wasn't anger he felt, or even embarrassment. It was curiosity. No one talked to him like that. No one dismantled his charm in public and then offered kindness like it was nothing. Janet Green had no idea who he was, how much money he had, or how many doors his name could open, and she clearly didn't care. He took a bite as he walked. It was, annoyingly, the best brownie he'd ever tasted. When he reached his car, Dennis paused, staring up at the late afternoon sky. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Meetings, decisions, responsibility. An entire world waited for him. But for the first time in a long time, only one thought mattered. Tomorrow, he decided. I'll come back tomorrow. Not for the sweets. For her. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. Your support helps this channel grow and brings you more stories like this one. Dennis Walker did not sleep well that night. That alone should have told him something was wrong. He lay in his penthouse bedroom staring at the ceiling, replaying the afternoon like a badly edited highlight reel. The laughter. The phones. The way Janet Green had looked at him amused, unbothered, completely unimpressed. He had negotiated billion-dollar contracts with less tension. At some point past midnight, he found himself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, rehearsing. Hi, my name is Dennis. Too stiff. Hey, I'm Dennis. I was wondering if... He stopped, rubbing a hand over his face. This was ridiculous. At 3 a.m, he did something that would have horrified his board of directors if they ever found out. He Googled, how to seem normal. The next afternoon, Dennis parked farther away than usual and walked the last few blocks. He told himself it was practical. Traffic was bad. Parking was limited. The truth was simpler. He needed time to breathe. The candy stand came into view, bright against the concrete and glass of the street. The striped awning fluttered slightly in the breeze. The jars were already lined up, glowing softly in the afternoon sun. Janet was there. She stood behind the counter, focused, hair tied back, apron already dusted with sugar. She looked exactly the same as the day before, and somehow that made Dennis more nervous than if she'd changed completely. He slowed his steps. For a brief, undignified moment, he considered turning around. Then Janet looked up. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply raised one eyebrow and went back to arranging cupcakes. Dennis swallowed and stepped closer. "Hello," he said carefully. "I'd like to buy something." Janet didn't respond right away. She adjusted a tray, straightened a label, took her time in a way that felt intentional. Dennis waited. 10 seconds. 20. A woman behind him shifted her weight. Finally, Janet glanced up again. "That's a good start," she said. "What would you like?" "One brownie," he replied. "Just one." Her eyebrow lifted higher. "Wow, restraint. I'm working on myself," he said. She reached for a brownie, then paused. "Actually," she said, setting it back, "I think I'll finish this first." She turned away and began wiping down the counter with exaggerated slowness. Dennis watched, trying not to smile. He deserved this. When she finally placed the brownie in a paper bag and slid it toward him, she said, "That'll be $3.50. "4?" he asked hopefully. "No." He pulled out a 20. Janet stared at the bill, then at him. "You don't have anything smaller?" "No," he said honestly. "I don't." "Of course you don't." She opened the small metal cash box and began counting change. Slowly, painfully slowly. A quarter. Pause. Another quarter. Longer pause. Dennis leaned on the counter. "Are you enjoying this?" "Immensely," she said without looking up. "This feels personal. This feels educational." When she finally pushed the coins toward him, she smiled small, victorious. Dennis scooped them up, the absurd weight of loose change settling into his pocket. "Happy?" he asked. "Very." He took a bite of the brownie and immediately regretted it because now he had to hide the fact that it was incredible. "Still good?" Janet asked. "Annoyingly so," he admitted. She smirked. "That's my brand." They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the street filling the space between them. Dennis felt oddly comfortable. "So," Janet said at last. "No marriage proposals today?" "No," he said quickly. "I've retired from that phase of my life." "Pity." He blinked. "Really?" "No," she said. "I'm kidding." He laughed, surprised by how easily it came. "What do you do, Dennis?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Management," he said smoothly. "Operations. Strategy. That sort of thing." She studied him for a second longer than necessary. "You talk like someone who's used to giving orders." "I try not to," he said. "I'm working on that too." She nodded, as if filing the information away, but didn't press. Janet didn't chase answers. She didn't ask where he lived, what kind of car he drove, or why his watch probably cost more than her entire stand, and that unsettled him more than any interrogation would have. A man approached the counter. Janet turned to him immediately, her tone shifting into efficient warmth. Dennis stepped aside without being asked. He waited. Again, when the customer left, Janet turned back to him. "You're still here." "I didn't want to rush you," he said. "I know your time is valuable." She paused, something flickering across her expression. "That's considerate," she said. "Weird, but considerate. I contain multitudes." She laughed, a quick sound that seemed to surprise even her. "You're strange," she said. "I've been told." She reached for another brownie, then stopped herself. "You already bought one." "I know," he said. He stopped. He didn't actually know what he wanted to say. Janet tilted her head. "You can just talk, you know. You don't have to buy something every time." He hesitated. "I don't want to be a nuisance." "You're not," she said. "Yet," he repeated solemnly. They shared a smile. A comfortable one. From across the street, A man leaned against a lamppost, watching. Richard. He'd seen Dennis the day before, laughing at the crowd's reaction, satisfied in a way he didn't want to examine too closely. Today, the satisfaction was gone. This time Dennis wasn't being laughed at. This time he was being allowed. Richard's jaw tightened. Back at the stand, Janet crossed her arms. So, management guy, what made you come back? Dennis considered lying. Then he remembered her words from the day before. Try respect. You, he said simply. She blinked. Me? You didn't treat me like I was special, he said. That doesn't happen often. She studied him again, more carefully this time. That sounds lonely, she said. He hadn't expected that. It can be, he admitted. She nodded, then turned back to organizing her display. The conversation clearly over. Dennis watched her for a moment longer, then stepped back. I'll let you work, he said. Same time tomorrow? She glanced up. You're planning ahead now? I like routines. She pretended to think about it. I suppose one brownie a day won't ruin my business. He smiled. I'll take that as a yes. Take it however you want, she said. Just don't propose. No promises, he said. She rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. As Dennis walked away, coins jingling in his pocket, he felt something settle inside him. This wasn't a challenge. It wasn't a conquest. It wasn't a story he could buy his way through. This was different. And for the first time, he knew exactly what he wanted. Not her attention. Her choice. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this one. By the 5th afternoon, Dennis Walker no longer needed to check the time. His body already knew. At exactly 2 o'clock, something inside him shifted an internal alarm that had nothing to do with meetings or calendars. His thoughts drifted away from spreadsheets and unanswered emails and landed, without fail, on a small candy stand glowing with color on a busy street. He told himself it was coincidence. But coincidences didn't wait for him every day. Janet noticed him before he reached the counter. You're late, she said, still arranging brownies into neat rows. Dennis glanced at his watch. I'm 3 minutes early. She looked at the small clock clipped to the stand. Yesterday you were early by 5. Today you're late by comparison. He smiled. I didn't realize punctuality was cumulative. It is when patterns form, she replied. That word stuck with him. Patterns. He ordered 1 brownie. Always 1 now. No grand gestures. No jokes. Progress. As she handed it over, their fingers brushed briefly. Not dramatic. Just enough to register. You come here every day, Janet said casually. I pass by every day, Dennis corrected. She arched an eyebrow. You pass by at exactly 2. He shrugged. Must be fate. She snorted. Must be habit. They leaned against opposite sides of the counter. The street buzzing around them, tourists laughing, music drifting from somewhere nearby, but their corner felt oddly insulated. How early did you wake up today? Dennis asked. Janet didn't hesitate. 4. Still? His frown was genuine. Always. That's cruel. That's commitment, she said. Doe doesn't wait for motivation. He watched her hands as she adjusted the trays steady, practiced. Sure. Who taught you? He asked. My grandmother, Janet replied. She said recipes are memories you can taste. You change them too much. You lose the story. Dennis smiled. That explains why everything here tastes honest. She paused, surprised. That's an unusual compliment. I'm an unusual man. That part, I believe. A gust of wind rattled the awning. Janet reached up instinctively to steady it, stretching on her toes. Dennis stepped forward to help and promptly knocked over a stack of napkins. They scattered across the sidewalk like surrender flags. Janet stared at the mess. Dennis froze. "I swear I didn't." She burst out laughing. Not the controlled smile she gave customers. Not the teasing smirk she used on him. This laugh was unguarded. "You're a menace," she said, crouching to help pick them up. "I bring chaos wherever I go." That explains a lot. They cleaned up together, shoulders brushing, the moment easy and warm. Janet laughed again, lighter this time, and Dennis felt something settle in his chest. She hadn't laughed like that in a while. From across the street, Richard noticed. He stood near a bus stop, phone in hand, pretending to scroll. He told himself he was just passing through, that he was curious, but his eyes kept drifting back to the stand, to Janet, to the man leaning too comfortably against her counter. Richard watched the way she smiled at Dennis, not flirtatious, not guarded. Easy. That bothered him more than anger ever could. Back at the stand, Janet handed Dennis his change. He frowned. "That's too much." She glanced at the bills. "No. It's right. You shorted yourself yesterday, too." She shrugged. "Guess I'm distracted." He studied her. "You don't seem like someone who misses details." She met his gaze. People notice what they care about. He didn't respond. Instead, he asked, "Do you like what you do?" Janet looked around. "Some days are hard, but it's mine." He nodded. "That matters." She tilted her head. "What about you? Do you like your job?" Dennis opened his mouth, then closed it. "I'm good at it," he said carefully. Still not an answer. He exhaled. "I hate boardrooms." That surprised her. "They're quiet in the wrong way," he continued. "Everyone's watching, waiting. Like if you relax, you'll lose something." Janet leaned her elbows on the counter. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," he admitted. "I feel watched everywhere." She gestured around them. "Not here." He followed her gaze, the uneven pavement, the jars, the chaos of the street. "No," he said softly. "Not here." Across the street, Richard's jaw tightened. Janet laughed again when Dennis tried to help carry a box and nearly dropped it. "You're a walking disaster," she said. "I'm doing my best." "That's what worries me." The days fell into rhythm. Dennis showed up daily, sometimes awkward, sometimes quiet, always present. Janet teased him, corrected him, let him stay, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something loosen inside her. But not everything unnoticed stays harmless. Richard watched again the next day. And the next? Jealousy didn't announce itself loudly. It waited. And it learned. Janet noticed him before he said her name. She always did. It was something she'd learned the hard way how to sense when a familiar presence entered a space, even before sound or shadow confirmed it. A shift in the air. A tightening in the chest she never quite acknowledged. Janet. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them and turned. Richard stood at the edge of the stand, hands in his pockets, posture casual in a way that was anything but. His light blue shirt was pressed, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. He looked good. He always had. That had never been the problem. "Hi, Richard," she said, keeping her voice neutral. Dennis, who had been reaching for his wallet, paused. He didn't turn immediately. He didn't need to. The change in Janet's tone told him everything. Richard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I was walking by," he said. "Thought I'd check in." "It's been a while." "It has," Janet agreed. Dennis stepped slightly to the side, suddenly aware that he was standing in the middle of something he didn't understand yet. He took a half step back, giving space without being asked. Richard's gaze flicked to him, then quick, assessing. "And you are?" Richard asked, extending a hand. Dennis hesitated only a fraction of a second before shaking it. Dennis. Richard, he said, grip firm. Friend of Janet's. Janet's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Ex, she corrected. Richard laughed lightly. Right. Ex. Ancient history. Dennis released his hand. Nice to meet you. Likewise, Richard said, though his eyes lingered a beat too long. Are you a customer? Something like that, Dennis replied. Janet cleared her throat. Dennis is a regular. Dennis turned to her, surprised by the word. Regular? He echoed. She shot him a look. Don't make me regret it. Richard smiled again, but this time it sharpened. That's nice, he said. You always did build routines quickly. Janet crossed her arms. What do you want, Richard? Straight to the point. He raised his hands in surrender. Nothing dramatic. I just wanted to see how you were doing. I'm working, she said. Same as always. He nodded. Some things don't change. Dennis felt the weight of the unspoken words settle between them. Richard shifted his stance, glancing at the stand. Business looks good. It's fine, Janet said. Still waking up at 4? He asked casually. Dennis's attention sharpened. Janet's shoulders stiffened. Yes. You always were stubborn, Richard said. I used to tell you you work too hard. You used to tell me a lot of things, she replied. The tension thickened. Dennis cleared his throat. I should get going. Janet looked at him quickly. You don't have to. It's fine, he said gently. Same time tomorrow? She nodded. Same time. Dennis stepped away, but he didn't miss the way Richard watched him leave. From across the street, Dennis glanced back once. Richard was still there, still smiling. Why does he keep coming back? Dennis asked himself as he walked. He didn't know the answer yet, but he didn't like the feeling settling in his gut. Richard stayed after Dennis left. He leaned against the counter as if he belonged there, as if the past gave him permission. So, he said lightly, management guy. Janet shot him a warning look. Don't. I'm just curious, Richard replied. You've never had much patience for tourists. He's not a tourist. That slipped out before she could stop it. Richard's smile faded slightly. Isn't he? Janet exhaled. What are you doing here, Richard? He looked at her, then really looked. You disappeared. I didn't, she said. You left. He scoffed. I left because I was trying to build something. Not with me, she said quietly. That landed. Richard straightened. That's not fair. You said this life was too small, she continued. That this stand, this street, this routine, I was holding you back. I said I wanted more stability, he argued. You promised stability, she said. What you delivered was uncertainty. Silence stretched between them. You were always tired, he said finally. Always working. There was never time for anything else. There was, Janet replied. You just didn't want it. Richard looked away. I thought you'd grow out of it, he said. That one day you'd realize you wanted more. Janet laughed softly, without humor. I have more. I just didn't choose the same version you did. He nodded slowly, as if accepting something he didn't like. Well, he said, forcing a smile. Looks like you're doing fine. She didn't respond. I should go, he added. But be careful, Janet. She frowned. About what? Men who wander in and out, he said. They don't always stay. She met his gaze evenly. Neither do the ones who leave. That ended the conversation. Richard walked away, hands in his pockets, steps measured. But his mind was already working. I am just getting for known. That night, Richard sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open. He told himself it was nothing. Just curiosity. Just concern. He typed the name into the search bar. Dennis Walker. The results loaded instantly. Headlines, photos, articles. Richard leaned back slowly, a smile spreading across his face, thin and satisfied. Well, he murmured, that explains a lot. The past, it seemed, had finally found a reason to wait. If you're feeling the tension rise, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories like this. Dennis Walker woke before his alarm. That alone felt wrong. For years, his mornings had been ruled by precision: alarm at 6, shower at 6:10, coffee at 6:20, car by 6:45. Control was a habit, and habits were comforting. But lately, control slipped through his fingers in small, unsettling ways. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the city below, phone buzzing on the nightstand. Emails stacked overnight like unanswered accusations. Urgent. Need clarification. Concerned stakeholders requesting explanation. He didn't open them yet. Walker Industries loomed in his mind the way a storm does when the sky is still blue, distant, inevitable. By the time Dennis walked into the building that bore his family name, the tension was already waiting for him. Glass walls, polished floors, faces that straightened when he passed. "Morning, Dennis," his assistant said, voice a shade too careful. "Morning," he replied, loosening his tie. The first meeting was already running when he stepped into the boardroom. That never happened. Conversations stalled. Screens froze mid-slide. Dennis felt the collective attention sharpen, the unspoken question hanging in the air. "Where were you?" "Apologies," he said calmly. "Let's continue." Mark Reynolds sat at the far end of the table, fingers laced, expression pleasant. Too pleasant. Mark had been COO for 3 years, efficient, ambitious, and unfailingly agreeable in public. He nodded now, as if nothing were amiss. "Of course," Mark said. "We were just reviewing the quarterly projections." Dennis glanced at the screen. Numbers stared back at him, numbers he didn't recognize. "That's not what I approved," Dennis said quietly. Mark tilted his head. "It's the revised forecast." "Revised by whom?" A pause. "By the analytics team," Mark said smoothly. "After your absence yesterday." Dennis's jaw tightened. He hadn't been absent. He'd been at the candy stand. The thought intruded, uninvited, and lingered. The meeting dragged. Questions piled up. Subtle glances passed between executives. Dennis answered what he could, flagged what he couldn't, and ended the session early under the guise of efficiency. As the room cleared, Mark lingered. "Everything all right?" Mark asked. Dennis met his gaze. "Why wouldn't it be?" Mark smiled. "Just checking. There's been some concern." "Concern," Dennis repeated. "Yes," Mark said lightly. "Emails. Rumors. People worry when leadership seems distracted." Dennis didn't respond. Mark's smile never wavered. "I'm sad." By noon, Dennis's inbox was a battlefield. Anonymous tips. Media inquiries referencing documents he'd never seen. A leaked report suggesting Walker Industries might shut down a factory, something Dennis had never discussed, let alone approved. He forwarded the email to legal, then stared at the screen until the words blurred. Someone was moving pieces without him. At 1:30, he closed his laptop. At 1:45, he left the building. The candy stand was already set up when Dennis arrived. The awning fluttered. The jars gleamed. Janet stood behind the counter. Hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up. The sight of her loosened something tight in his chest. "You look tense," she said, not looking up. "Do I?" "Yes." He smiled faintly. "You're observant." "Occupational hazard," she said. "One brownie?" "Yes," he said. "Please." She handed it to him. He paid without thinking. Janet glanced at his watch as she gave him change. Her eyes lingered a beat too long. "That's nice," she said. He followed her gaze. "It was a gift." "From who?" "Someone who thought I needed it." She hummed, unconvinced. They stood in their usual positions, the street moving around them. "You're quieter today," Janet said. "I had meetings." She snorted. "That explains it. You don't like meetings?" "I don't like rooms where everyone pretends they're not waiting to speak," she said. "Feels dishonest." Dennis smiled despite himself. "You'd hate boardrooms." "I already do," she said, "and I've never been in one." "That's impressive." "People tell you who they are when they think you're listening," she said. "Boardrooms just make it louder." He studied her. "You'd be good at what I do." She shook her head. "I don't like power that needs permission." The words hit closer than she knew. They fell into a comfortable silence. Dennis ate his brownie slowly, savoring the familiar taste. "Do you ever get tired of this?" he asked. She looked around. "Sometimes. But it's mine. Time." He nodded. "That matters." She watched him carefully. "You talk like someone who owns a lot of things." He hesitated. "I manage them." She smiled faintly. "Same thing." From across the street, Richard watched. He'd positioned himself near the coffee shop this time, pretending to work on his phone. His eyes flicked up every few seconds, tracking Dennis's movements, the way Janet leaned in when she laughed. Richard's search from the night before still burned in his mind. Dennis Walker, CEO, net worth, substantial. So that was it. The expensive watch, the way he spoke, the confidence that wasn't arrogance but proximity to power. Richard's lips pressed into a thin line. Back at the stand, Janet handed Dennis his change and frowned. "You gave me a 20, she said. "This is too much." He glanced at the bills. "Is it?" "Yes." He smiled sheepishly. "Sorry, habit." "What habit?" "Not paying attention." She studied him. "You pay attention to everything." He didn't answer. A gust of wind rattled the awning again. Dennis reached up instinctively to steady it, then stopped himself. "Go ahead," Janet said. "I trust you." He froze for half a second, then smiled and helped secure it without incident. "Progress." She laughed softly. "See? Not everything you touch breaks." "Debatable," he said. She leaned against the counter. "You're different today." "How so?" "Like you're somewhere else." He considered telling her. Instead, he said, "Sometimes I feel like my life is split in half." She tilted her head. "That sounds uncomfortable." "It is," he admitted. "I don't know how long I can keep pretending they don't affect each other." She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't push. And somehow, that made the truth press harder against his ribs. Take ability in Indirai. Back at Walker Industries, Mark Reynolds closed his office door and checked his phone. Another email had gone out. Another concern raised. Everything was moving according to plan. Take ability in Indirai. Dennis left the stand later than usual that day. As he walked away, Janet watched him go, her gaze thoughtful. She glanced at his watch again. At the way he checked his phone but didn't answer it. At the careful distance he kept from certain questions. Seeds of suspicion didn't sprout loudly. They settled quietly, waiting. Quick pause if you're enjoying this story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. Your support helps us keep bringing you stories like this. Dennis reached his car and stopped. He looked back at the stand one last time. 2 lives, 2 worlds, and a truth that couldn't stay hidden forever. Janet didn't plan to look him up. The idea arrived quietly, the way uncomfortable thoughts often do, uninvited, persistent, impossible to ignore once noticed. It happened late, after she'd cleaned the last pan and wiped sugar from the counter for the third time. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against her ears. She sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold in her hands, staring at nothing in particular. Dennis's watch flashed in her mind, the way he checked his phone but never answered it. The words he used, stakeholders, projections, strategy, slipping out when he thought she wasn't listening. Janet hated herself a little for wondering. Curiosity felt like betrayal. Still, when she opened her laptop, her fingers moved on their own. She typed his name, Dennis Walker. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the screen filled. Headlines stacked one on top of another, clean and confident. Walker Industries CEO spotted at charity gala. Dennis Walker, the man behind the market moves. Walker fortune expands amid tech surge. Janet stared. She scrolled. Photos appeared: Dennis in tailored suits, standing in front of glass buildings, shaking hands with people whose names she recognized. Articles talked about strategy, leadership, legacy. Numbers followed him everywhere, attached to his name like a shadow. Billionaire, CEO, one of the most powerful men in the city. Her stomach dropped. She closed the laptop, then opened it again. She read everything. The interviews where he spoke about responsibility, the profiles that praised his restraint, his intelligence, his composure under pressure, the speculation about his personal life, carefully vague, neatly empty. She leaned back in her chair, breath shallow. Management, he'd said. I feel watched everywhere, he'd told her. It all rearranged itself in her mind, pieces clicking into place with a sickening clarity. Fear crept in first. Not of him, but of what this meant. How small she must have looked from his world. How temporary. How easy it would be for him to leave. Then came anger. Sharp and hot. He hadn't just omitted the truth. He'd curated it. Janet closed the laptop again and stood abruptly, pacing the length of her apartment. Her hands shook. She pressed them together, willing them still. Maybe he was waiting, she told herself. Maybe he wanted to be normal for once. The thought didn't comfort her. It made everything worse. The next day, Dennis arrived at 2:00 exactly. As always, Janet was already there, setting out the jars, her movements precise and controlled. She didn't look up when he approached. Hi, he said. She didn't answer. Dennis hesitated, then leaned slightly closer. Everything okay? She placed a tray down with a little more force than necessary. What do you want today? She asked, voice professional, distant. He blinked. One brownie? She handed it to him without comment. He paid. She gave him his change. No teasing. No smile. The space between them felt suddenly wide. Dennis frowned. Did I do something? Janet met his eyes then. Who are you? She asked quietly. The words landed between them like glass. Dennis froze. What do you mean? He asked, though something in his chest already knew. I mean, she said, steady but pale. Who are you really? The street noise faded. Or maybe he stopped hearing it. Janet. Don't, she said. Just don't. She took a breath. I know who you are, Dennis. His jaw tightened. She continued, the words tasting bitter. I know about Walker Industries. I know about the boardrooms you hate, and the life you pretended not to live. He said her name again, softer this time. I was going to tell you. When? She asked. After another brownie? Another week? When it was convenient? He looked away. That hurt more than any denial. I didn't want you to look at me differently, he said finally. I didn't want this. She laughed once, short and humorless. You didn't want the truth. I wanted you, he said. And you thought lying was the way to get me? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I wanted to be a person here, not a headline, not a number. Janet's eyes shone, But she didn't let the tears fall. "So you decided for me," she said. "You decided what I could handle." "That's not fair." "No," she agreed. "It's not." They stood there, the silence heavy and fragile. "I never asked you for anything," she said. "Not money, not help, not protection. I asked for honesty." Dennis swallowed. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing this," he said, gesturing weakly between them. "Of you walking away the moment you knew." Janet looked at him for a long time. "You don't get to control the outcome by hiding the truth," she said. "That's not protection. That's manipulation. The word cut." "I didn't mean it that way," he said. "I know," she replied. "That's what makes it worse." She stepped back, putting physical distance between them for the first time since they'd met. "I need space," she said. Dennis nodded slowly. "I understand." "I don't think you do," she said gently. He lingered for a moment, as if hoping she'd say something else. She didn't, so he turned and walked away. From across the street, Richard watched. He saw the way Janet's shoulders shook once Dennis disappeared. He saw the way she pressed her fingers into the counter, steadying herself. Something like satisfaction stirred in his chest quickly, followed by something uglier. Back at his car, Dennis sat with his hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. He felt stripped. Exposed. He'd told the truth too late. That night, Janet didn't sleep. She lay awake, replaying every conversation, every look, every moment she'd mistaken silence for sincerity. Was any of it real? She wondered. The answer scared her. The next afternoon, Dennis didn't come. Janet noticed immediately. She told herself it was nothing. The day after that, he didn't come either. The routine they'd built dissolved quietly, leaving behind an ache neither of them knew how to name. Truth, it turned out, didn't just hurt. It lingered. If this chapter hit hard, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. Your support helps us keep bringing you stories that stay with you. The headline broke before Dennis Walker finished his first cup of coffee. He wasn't even looking for it. His phone buzzed once on the counter, a sharp, impatient vibration. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. By the third time, the silence in his apartment felt too loud to ignore. He picked it up. Walker Industries considers factory shutdown, sources say. Dennis stared at the screen. For a moment, his brain refused to cooperate, as if the words were written in a language he didn't understand. He opened the article, scrolling quickly, pulse thudding in his ears. Unnamed sources. Internal concerns. Cost-cutting measures. Hundreds of jobs at risk. None of it was true. Not the way it was written. Not the way it was framed. Dennis set the phone down slowly and exhaled through his nose. His first instinct was anger. His second was calculation. Who leaked this? By the time he reached the office, the building felt different. Conversations stopped when he passed. Eyes flicked away too quickly. The air buzzed with tension that had nothing to do with productivity. In the elevator, his assistant stood beside him, hands clasped too tightly. "Have you seen the news?" she asked carefully. "Yes," Dennis replied. "We're getting calls. Media. Union reps. The board wants an emergency meeting." "Huh?" Dennis nodded. "Schedule it." When he stepped into the boardroom, Mark Reynolds was already there, leaning against the table, tablet in hand. "Rough morning," Mark said sympathetically. Dennis didn't respond. The meeting spiraled fast. Executives spoke over one another. Questions flew about timing, about optics, about damage control. Dennis listened, jaw tight, taking mental notes. When it was finally his turn to speak, he said only, "There is no approved plan to shut down any factory." The room stilled. Mark cleared his throat. "With respect, Dennis, The report circulating internally suggests. There is no approved plan, Dennis repeated, voice calm but edged with steel. If something is circulating, it didn't come from me. Mark met his gaze, expression unreadable. Then we have a problem. Yes, Dennis agreed. We do. Had a scenity. Across the city, Janet heard about it while handing a customer their change. Did you see the news? The woman asked casually. That big company, Walker something. Shutting down a factory? Janet's fingers stilled. No, she said. I hadn't. Well, it's awful, the woman continued. People losing jobs while billionaires get richer. Janet forced a polite smile. That's terrible. But the words rang hollow. The name echoed in her mind all afternoon. Walker Industries. She told herself not to think about Dennis. She failed. By the time the lunch crowd thinned, the whispers had started. Isn't that the guy who's always here? I heard he's laying people off. Figures. Janet kept her head down, hands busy, heart sinking. From across the street, Richard listened. He stood near the coffee shop again, phone pressed to his ear, voice low. Yes, he said quietly. That's what I heard. A pause. No, not directly, but the timing makes sense. Another pause. I'm just saying you might want to look into it. He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. Mark Reynolds leaned back in his chair on the other end of the city, staring at the email Richard had forwarded earlier that morning. It wasn't much. Just fragments, observations, patterns. But it was enough. Dennis didn't go to the candy stand that day. Janet noticed anyway. She noticed the absence the way one notices a missing tooth with their tongue constantly, unconsciously, with a dull ache. She told herself it was for the best. Distance was safer. Still, when a group of teenagers walked past and one of them said, "That's the billionaire's girlfriend stand," her stomach twisted. I'm not... Janet started, then stopped. What was she, exactly? That night, she overheard two women talking near the bus stop. Apparently he's ruthless, one said. Pretends to be nice, then pulls the rug out. Figures, the other replied. They always do. Janet walked away before they noticed her. She didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She went quiet. Dennis called her that evening. It rang. Once. Twice. She didn't answer. He left a voicemail he erased halfway through. What was there to say? I didn't do this. I swear. Truth sounded thin when shouted over headlines. Richard sat alone in his apartment, staring at his phone. He told himself he was doing the right thing, that Janet deserved protection from powerful men, from worlds that chewed people up and spat them out. He'll hurt her, Richard thought. He already has. He ignored the part of himself that recognized the satisfaction curling in his chest. The next day, Janet returned to the stand. So did the whispers. A man asked pointed questions about Dennis. A woman muttered something about rich liars. Janet answered politely, distantly, like a shield had dropped around her. When Dennis finally appeared on the far end of the street, her breath caught before she could stop it. He looked tired. Not just stressed, worn. He slowed when he saw her. Uncertainty in his posture. Janet turned away. Dennis stopped a few steps from the stand. Janet, he said quietly. She didn't look at him. I know what you've heard, he continued. I need you to know. I don't want to talk about it, she said. Please. She finally met his eyes. Everything you touch becomes public, she said. I didn't sign up for that. I didn't ask you to. You didn't ask me anything, she replied. You decided. The words echoed their last conversation, sharper now with context. I didn't shut down any factory, Dennis said. Someone leaked false information. And you expect people to believe you? She asked softly. After everything? He flinched. I expected you to believe me, he said. Janet's chest tightened. I don't know what to believe anymore, she admitted. That was the truth. Dennis nodded slowly. I understand. She stepped back again, creating distance where closeness used to live. I need time, she said. Again. He didn't argue. He just nodded and walked away. From across the street, Richard watched, his expression unreadable. Rumors didn't need proof. They needed momentum. And momentum, once gained, was hard to stop. If the tension is rising for you, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. Your support helps us keep bringing you stories where nothing is simple and everything matters. Janet had always believed that love should feel like relief. Not fireworks, not spectacle, relief. The kind that settled in your chest after a long day. The kind that made space instead of taking it up. Standing behind her candy stand that morning, listening to whispers trail her like shadows, she wondered when relief had turned into weight. She watched a man hesitate before ordering, eyes flicking to her face as if measuring her worth against a headline he'd read. She smiled anyway. She always did. But the smile felt thinner now, stretched over a question she couldn't answer. Do I belong anywhere near his world? The question had lodged itself deep, growing louder with every passing hour. Across the city, Dennis Walker sat alone in his office long after sunset. The lights were dim. The city glowed through the glass walls like a distant promise he no longer trusted. His phone lay face down on the desk. Silent now, not because the crisis had passed, but because he'd stopped answering. He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion sinking into his bones. Every meeting blurred into the next. Every explanation sounded like an excuse. He could feel the company pulling at him from all sides, 1,000 hands demanding certainty while offering none in return. Mark Reynolds knocked lightly before entering. Still here? Mark asked, stepping inside with a sympathetic smile. Dennis didn't look up. That obvious? Mark set a folder on the desk. I thought you might want an update. Dennis flipped it open. More reports, more projections, more concern. Mark leaned against the desk, voice calm. This isn't about blame, it's about perception. Right now, the board needs reassurance. And you're offering it? Dennis asked flatly. Mark didn't flinch. I'm offering support. Dennis finally met his gaze. By feeding them rumors? Mark spread his hands. By addressing them. You've been distracted. Dennis laughed once, bitter. That's generous. Look, Mark said gently. You built something incredible. Let me help you protect it. The words sounded reasonable. That was the problem. Richard didn't sleep much anymore. He spent his nights pacing, phone glowing in his hand, reading and rereading articles that mentioned Dennis's name. Each headline felt like validation, each rumor a step closer to what he told himself was justice. He convinced himself it was about Janet, that men like Dennis Walker didn't stay, that power corrupted, that the fall would hurt her more the longer it took. So when he forwarded another email to Mark Reynolds, this one hinting at Dennis's unreliability, he told himself he was preventing something worse. I'm protecting her, he thought. He ignored the thrill that came with it. Janet found the email by accident. She was closing up early, fingers numb from the cold, when her phone buzzed with a notification she didn't recognize. An email forwarded from an unfamiliar address, no subject line, just an attachment and a single line of text. Thought you should see this. Her stomach tightened. The document opened slowly. It was an internal memo, Walker Industries letterhead, unmistakable. Notes in the margins, a chain of forwarded messages discussing leaks, timing, and external pressure. One name appeared more than once. Richard Brooks. Janet stared at the screen, pulse roaring in her ears. She scrolled. There it was again. Richard's email address, his phrasing, his voice polite, concerned, insidious. Her hands began to shake. She closed the file, then opened it again, as if hoping it would change. It didn't. The betrayal felt different from Dennis's. Sharper. Closer. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She called Richard. He answered on the second ring. "Janet?" "We need to talk," she said, voice dangerously calm. "Now." "Yes." There was a pause. "Okay." They met near the river, the city humming around them, indifferent to the quiet disaster unfolding between two people who once knew each other too well. Richard arrived first, hands in his pockets, expression cautious. "You sounded upset," he said. Janet didn't bother with pleasantries. She held up her phone. "Explain this." Richard glanced at the screen, and for the briefest moment, his mask slipped. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "So it's real," she said. "You've been feeding information to his company." "I was being careful," Richard said quickly. "I was being responsible." "You were sabotaging him." "I was protecting you." The words detonated between them. "Protecting me from what?" Janet demanded. "From someone I chose." "You didn't know who he was," Richard shot back. "Men like him don't see people like us as equals. That's not your decision to make." "He lied to you." "And so did you," she said. "At least he told me eventually." Richard stepped closer. "You don't understand how dangerous his world is." "I understand exactly how dangerous you are right now," Janet said. His jaw tightened. "I did this for you." "No," she said, voice breaking at last. "You did this because you couldn't stand losing." Silence fell, thick and suffocating. Richard looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time and not liking what he found. "You're choosing him," he said. "I'm choosing myself," Janet replied. She turned and walked away. In the Dennis heard about the confrontation from Mark Reynolds. Mark mentioned it casually, as if it were an aside. "Apparently your acquaintance had a run-in with Janet Green." Dennis stiffened. "What?" "Richard Brooks," Mark clarified. "Seems he got involved more than he should have." Dennis's chest tightened. "You knew?" Mark hesitated just long enough. "I suspected." Dennis stood abruptly, chair scraping back. "You let this happen." "I let information come to light," Mark said calmly. "Sometimes truth finds its way out." Dennis stared at him, realization dawning. Mark smiled faintly. "You look exhausted. Maybe it's time you let someone else steer." Dennis left without another word. In the that night Janet packed away her stand in silence. Dennis didn't come. She didn't expect him to. She felt hollow, like something had been torn out and left a clean, aching space behind. She'd lost trust in two men in two very different ways, and in doing so, she'd learned something painful. Love without trust wasn't love at all. It was a burden. She locked the storage door, turned off the lights, and walked home alone, choosing distance, choosing quiet, choosing herself. If this chapter hit you in the chest, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you stories where the hardest choices matter most. The boardroom had never felt this small. Dennis Walker stood at the head of the table, hands resting lightly on the polished wood, eyes scanning faces he'd known for years, faces that now avoided his gaze or studied him with careful neutrality. The city skyline stretched behind them through the glass wall, indifferent and unreachable. A vote of no confidence. The words echoed in his mind, heavy and final. Mark Reynolds sat 2 seats to Dennis's right, posture relaxed, expression concerned in a way that felt rehearsed. He hadn't spoken much since the meeting began. He didn't need to. The room was already leaning in his favor. "We need stability," one board member said, fingers tapping nervously against a tablet. "The market doesn't respond well to uncertainty, especially when that uncertainty appears to come from the top," another added. Dennis inhaled slowly. "The rumors circulating are based on false information. With respect," a third voice cut in. False information doesn't spread this fast without a source. Dennis's jaw tightened. Mark leaned forward then, finally speaking. No one is questioning your intentions, Dennis. But intent doesn't calm shareholders. Results do. Dennis turned to him. And your solution? Mark met his gaze evenly. A temporary shift in leadership. Let me handle operations until things settle. A murmur rippled through the room. Temporary. Dennis recognized the word for what it was. A trap. You want me to step aside? Dennis said. Just for now. Mark replied gently. Think of it as protecting what you've built. Dennis looked around the table again. No one objected. The silence was louder than any accusation. Janet didn't know about the board meeting yet. She found out the way most people did through a push notification she hadn't asked for. Walker Industries board to vote on leadership change. Her breath caught. She stood in her kitchen, phone glowing in her hand, the room suddenly too quiet. The article was thin on details but heavy on implication. Analysts speculated. Sources hinted. Dennis's name was everywhere, stripped of nuance, reduced to risk. She sat down slowly, the chair scraping against the floor. This is what his world does, she thought. It eats its own. She wanted to shut the phone off, to protect herself the way she'd promised she would. Instead, she opened her messages. Scrolled. Stopped. There an email thread she'd forwarded to herself days ago, still sitting unread in a folder she hadn't dared to open again. Richard's name. Mark's replies. Evidence. Her chest tightened. Silence, she realized, wasn't neutral. It was permission. Back in the boardroom, the vote was called. Hands rose around the table, some hesitant, some resolute. Dennis counted them without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. By the time it reached a majority, his stomach had gone numb. Effective immediately, the chairperson said, voice formal. Mark Reynolds will assume operational control pending further review. Dennis nodded once. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He gathered his papers slowly, deliberately, as if the calm might hold him together. Mark stood. Dennis, I want you to know this isn't personal. Dennis looked at him then. Really looked. I know, he said quietly. That's why it hurts. He left the room without another word. That evening, Dennis sat alone in his apartment, jacket still on, lights off. The city blinked outside the window, alive with other people's lives. His phone lay on the table, screen dark. He hadn't checked it in hours. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what came next. He thought of Janet. Of the stand. The laughter. The way she'd looked at him before the truth broke everything open. He wondered if he deserved her standing beside him now. He wondered if losing everything was the price of finally telling the truth. Janet didn't sleep. She called her friend Mia just after midnight. I need help, Janet said. Mia didn't ask questions. I'm on my way. By morning, the small kitchen table was covered in printouts, emails, screenshots, timelines scribbled on scrap paper. Mia sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop balanced on her knees. This is big, Mia said quietly. If this is real. It is, Janet replied. I checked. Another friend, Caleb, joined them later, eyes widening as he read through the documents. This isn't just office politics, he said. This is sabotage. Janet stared at the wall, heart pounding. If I do this, there's no going back. Mia looked up. You don't have to. Janet shook her head. Yes, I do. Because if she didn't act, she'd already chosen. Dennis's phone buzzed just after noon. He almost ignored it. Almost. Janet's name lit up the screen. His breath caught. Hello? He said. Where are you? She asked. There was no accusation in her voice, no anger, just urgency. At home. I'm coming over, she said. Don't argue. He didn't. When she arrived, she didn't hesitate. She walked straight past him into the living room and dropped a folder onto the table. You were set up, she said. Dennis stared at the papers. Janet. I know, she interrupted. I know I said I needed space. I know I walked away. But silence is a choice, and I'm done choosing it. He flipped through the pages, recognition dawning. Richard, he said. And Mark, she added. Together. Dennis sank onto the couch, head in his hands. I didn't want to drag you into this, he said. You didn't, she replied. They did. He looked up at her. Why are you here? Janet swallowed. Because if I walk away now, I lose you forever. And I won't let that happen without a fight. The words settled between them, fragile, powerful. Dennis nodded slowly. Then we fight. Outside, the city carried on, unaware that the balance had just shifted again. The trap had snapped shut. But sometimes, even traps could be turned. If this chapter had you holding your breath, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you stories where silence breaks and choices matter. They worked in silence at first. Not the awkward kind, no false politeness, no forced distance. Just the quiet of two people who understood that something important was finally happening, and words would only get in the way if they came too soon. Janet spread the documents across Dennis's dining table, arranging them with the same care she used when lining up jars at her stand. Emails, screenshots, timestamps, pieces of a puzzle that had almost destroyed him. Dennis watched her hands move. You didn't have to do this, he said quietly. Janet didn't look up. I know. That answer carried more weight than any justification. When she finally met his eyes, there was no anger there, just resolve. I didn't come back because I felt sorry for you, she said. I came back because the truth matters. Dennis nodded. I was afraid. She raised an eyebrow. Of what? Of being seen, he admitted. Of you realizing how much of my life is built on control. She leaned back in the chair. I already knew that. He smiled faintly. I thought if I kept you separate from it, I could protect us both. And instead? She asked. I made the same mistake I accuse others of, he said. I decided for someone else. Janet folded her arms. I wasn't angry because you're rich. I was angry because you didn't trust me with the truth. He swallowed. I'm sorry. The words were simple, unpolished. They mattered. She exhaled slowly. I was scared too. That surprised him. I don't belong in your world, she said. I never wanted to, but I also didn't want to feel like I was pretending with you. You weren't, he said immediately. I know that now, she replied, but I needed to hear it. Dennis reached across the table not to touch her, but to slide one of the emails closer. Let's finish this, he said. Together. That was the moment it shifted. Not when they forgave each other, but when they chose to stand side by side. Oh, the night blurred into strategy. Dennis explained how the board worked, who could be swayed, where pressure points lived. Janet listened, asked sharp questions, spotted inconsistencies he'd missed. You keep assuming they'll act rationally, she said at one point. But they're acting out of fear. He paused. You're right. She smiled faintly. People do stupid things when they're afraid. Experience? He asked. She shrugged. I dated Richard. The humor broke something open. They worked through the evidence, cross-checking timelines. Janet called Mia, who pulled additional records from a friend in IT. Caleb forwarded a document he'd found buried in a public filing. By dawn, the table was a battlefield of paper and clarity. This is enough, Dennis said quietly. If we present it right. Janet nodded. Then we don't waste it. They stood by the window as the sky lightened, the city slowly waking below them. Dennis glanced at her. I don't want to lose you. She looked at him, really looked. Then don't try to carry everything alone, she said. He smiled. Deal. For the first time since the truth broke them apart, the closeness felt earned. Oh. Later that afternoon, Janet returned to her stand. Dennis walked with her not as a shadow, not as a protector, but as a presence she chose. The whispers followed them, softer now, uncertain. Janet didn't flinch. She handed a customer their change, smiling easily. Dennis leaned against the counter, watching her with quiet admiration. You look different, she said. How so? Like you're not running. He considered that. I'm not. She nodded. Good. When the crowd thinned, he spoke again. Thank you. For what? For not letting silence decide for us. She smiled. It almost did. Almost. If you're loving this turning point, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you stories where love becomes a choice, not a coincidence. That evening, Dennis sent a single email. To the board. Subject line, request for immediate review new evidence. He attached everything. Janet watched him hit send. What happens now? She asked. He reached for her hand not to claim but to connect. Now, he said. We stop reacting and start leading. She squeezed his hand. Together. The word settled between them, solid and real. The night ahead would be long. But for the first time in weeks, neither of them felt alone. The cameras were already waiting. They lined the marble steps outside Walker Industries like patient predators. Lenses pointed at the doors. Microphones bristling with anticipation. Inside, the building hummed with the nervous energy of people who knew something was about to break and didn't know which side they'd be standing on when it did. Dennis Walker adjusted his cuff once. Not because it needed it. Because it reminded him to breathe. Janet stood a few steps behind him, calm in a way that surprised even her. She'd expected her heart to race, her hands to shake. Instead, there was a steadiness she didn't recognize at first, and then understood. She wasn't here to be saved. She was here because the truth belonged to her too. The boardroom doors closed with a soft click. Around the table sat the board members, some stiff, some guarded, some already resigned to whatever outcome this day would deliver. At the far end sat Mark Reynolds, posture relaxed, fingers steepled, expression composed. He looked like a man who believed the ending had already been written. The chairperson cleared her throat. We're convened to address Mr. Walker's request for an immediate review. Dennis nodded once. Thank you for agreeing. Mark smiled faintly. Of course. Transparency benefits everyone. Dennis met his gaze evenly. It does. A screen flickered to life at the front of the room. Dennis didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He simply began. These are internal emails sent over the last 6 weeks, he said. They reference leaks, timing, coordination, and selective disclosures to external parties. The first email appeared, then another. Timelines followed clean, precise, undeniable. Janet watched the room change. Brows furrowed. Pens paused mid-note. A hand lowered slowly from a coffee cup that suddenly seemed irrelevant. Mark's smile tightened. Dennis continued. This change shows correspondence between our COO and an external contact, Richard Brooks. A murmur rippled through the room. Mark leaned forward. Dennis, with respect. Please, Dennis said calmly. Let me finish. The next slide displayed Richard's name again. And again. Each time attached to a date. A document. A leak. Mr. Brooks is not an employee of Walker Industries, Dennis said. Yet he appears repeatedly in discussions regarding internal strategy and public narratives. Janet felt the weight of it, then not triumph, not vindication, but gravity. This was what truth looked like when it stood upright. The chairperson turned to Mark. "Care to explain?" Mark spread his hands. "I was approached with concerns. I listened. That's my job." Dennis nodded. "Listening is not the same as collaborating." Another email appeared, this one unmistakable. Mark's words, his phrasing, his intent. Silence fell, the kind that doesn't invite interruption. From the corner of the room, legal counsel shifted in their seat. The chairperson inhaled slowly. "Mr. Reynolds?" Mark's voice was steady, but something brittle crept in. "I acted in the company's best interest." Dennis turned slightly enough to include Janet in his peripheral vision. "And whose interest was it?" Dennis asked. "To destabilize leadership through misinformation." The screen changed again. This time it wasn't an email. It was a recorded message, short, clipped, unmistakable. Richard's voice filled the room. "I'm just saying you might want to look into it. Timing matters." A pause. "And if the story breaks before he can respond, well, perception is everything." The recording ended. Janet felt her breath leave her lungs. She hadn't known Dennis would use that. She hadn't known how final it would sound. Mark's composure cracked. He started, then stopped. The chairperson didn't wait. "Mr. Reynolds, you will step down effective immediately, pending formal investigation." Mark's face drained of color. He stood abruptly. "You're making a mistake." Dennis met his gaze. "No," he said quietly. "We're correcting one." Mark left the room without another word. Outside, the press conference was already underway. Dennis stepped to the podium as flashes erupted around him. The city's noise faded into a low hum behind the glass doors. Janet stood off to the side, watching. Not the man she'd first met, careless, hidden, afraid of being known, but the one who stood now unarmed except for truth. Dennis spoke plainly. "There will be no factory shut down," he said. "The reports suggesting otherwise were based on misinformation. We've identified the source and are taking appropriate action." Questions flew. He answered only what mattered. When asked about Richard Brooks, he paused. "Mr. Brooks acted out of personal motivation," Dennis said. "That will be addressed through proper channels." Janet felt the eyes turn to her, then curious, speculative. Dennis didn't look back. He didn't need to. By the time the conference ended, the narrative had shifted, not because Dennis had shouted louder, but because the truth had nowhere left to hide. Conady, how? Later, in the quiet of the now empty boardroom, Janet stood by the window. The city looked the same. She felt different. Dennis joined her, hands in his pockets. "It's over," he said. She shook her head gently. "It's finished." He smiled at the distinction. "You didn't gloat," she said. "I didn't need to," he replied. "Winning like that costs too much." She turned to him. "You didn't lose yourself either." He met her gaze. That was the hardest part. They stood there together, no cameras, no crowd, no performance. Just two people who had chosen truth over comfort. Dennis had retained control of his company. But more importantly, he'd let go of the arrogance that once told him he could manage outcomes by managing people. Janet watched power stripped of its costume, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of it. Because it wasn't standing over her. It was standing beside her. The city didn't celebrate. There were no banners, no applause, no dramatic shift in the rhythm of the streets. Morning arrived the same way it always did. Sunlight creeping between buildings, delivery trucks humming, footsteps echoing on familiar pavement. That was how Janet knew it was really over. The chaos had burned itself out quietly. She unlocked the storage door just after dawn, the metal clicking open with a sound she'd heard thousands of times before. The candy stand waited inside, folded and patient. She pulled it out piece by piece, muscle memory guiding her hands. Red and white awning. Wooden counter. Glass jars. Normal. She breathed out slowly. For the first time in weeks, the air didn't feel heavy. As she set out the trays, she noticed how her hands had stopped shaking. The fear, constant and sharp, had dulled into something manageable. Not gone, but no longer in control. People passed by. Some glanced at her longer than usual, curiosity lingering. A few smiled, tentative. One woman nodded as if in respect. Janet didn't chase their reactions. She arranged the brownies carefully, just as her grandmother had taught her. Straight lines, clean edges. Care, not perfection. By mid-morning, the street had filled. Orders came and went. Laughter rose and faded. Life resumed its steady pace. Dennis didn't come. Janet noticed, but she didn't panic. Not anymore. She told herself the truth gently. If he comes, it will be because he chooses to, not because he thinks he should. That mattered. It was just after noon when she sensed him. Not the way she used to, with anticipation or dread, but with awareness, like recognizing a familiar note in a song you hadn't realized was playing. She looked up. Dennis stood a few steps away, hands in his coat pockets, posture relaxed. No suit, no watch, no phone in his hand, just him. He didn't approach immediately. He waited. Janet studied him from behind the counter. He looked different. Not smaller. Not diminished. Lighter. She gestured toward the stand. You going to stand there all day? A smile tugged at his mouth. He stepped forward. Hi, he said. The word landed softly. Not as an entrance. Not as an announcement. Just a beginning. Hi, Janet replied. They stood there for a moment, the space between them unhurried. I didn't want to interrupt, Dennis said. Or assume. I noticed, she said. That's new. He nodded. I'm learning. She slid a brownie across the counter. On the house. He raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? I am. He took it but didn't eat it right away. How are you? He asked. She considered the question honestly. Steady. He smiled. That sounds like progress. What about you? He exhaled. Quiet, which is unfamiliar, but good. They shared a small smile, no subtext, no tension, just recognition. Dennis glanced around the stand. Everything looks the same. Mostly, she said. I rearranged the jars. He chuckled. Of course you did. They fell into silence again. Comfortable, earned. After a moment, Dennis spoke. I'm not here to explain anything. She nodded. Good. I'm not here to fix anything. Also good. He hesitated, then met her eyes. I just wanted to see you. Janet studied him. Not the version from headlines. Not the man from boardrooms. The one who stood in front of her now. Okay, she said. Dennis swallowed. Would you like to get coffee with me? No jokes. No bargaining. No spectacle. Just an invitation. Janet didn't answer right away. She wiped her hands on her apron, a familiar gesture grounding her. She glanced at the street, the stand, the jars she'd lined up with care. Then she looked back at him. Coffee sounds fine, she said, but not today. He nodded immediately. Whenever you're ready. She smiled faintly. Tomorrow, after I close. His relief didn't explode outward. It settled. Tomorrow, he repeated. She leaned forward slightly. And Dennis? Yes? We start with hello. His smile this time was real and unguarded. Deal. He stepped back, giving her space, and turned to leave. As he walked away, Janet watched him not with longing, not with fear, but with clarity. This wasn't a rescue. It wasn't a reward. It was a choice. And for the first time, she knew exactly what that was worth. No buying, no joking. Just two people standing where they were and choosing to step forward together. If this ending meant something to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and comment the city you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you more stories where love is chosen, not purchased. Real wealth isn't power. It's being chosen without force, without fear, without